Hi everybody, and welcome to Chapter 1 of Communicating with Others from The Natural Speaker, the 8th edition. This is the book that you'll be using for the semester, and I am going to review Chapter 1 and things that you would like to pay or that you should pay attention to for testing purposes. Okay, so the objectives of this chapter are to define communication, define the components of communication, explain the principles of communication, explain the concept that attitude is more important than aptitude, and list the communication skills for your life. Now, the first thing that I want to mention to you is public speaking is way more than just getting up to a podium and speaking, and I will reiterate that through the entire semester to you, but communicating with others is your most important skill. It really is, whether it be in public speaking or your personal relationships. Okay. So on page 2, the first thing that they talk about is what is communication. You need to think about what is communication to you. The definition for communication is it's the process of sending and receiving messages. Okay? The sender sends a message through a channel within a specific environment to a receiver. The receiver responds with feedback to the sender. Noise can interfere with the fidelity or accuracy of the message, and communication can be both verbal and nonverbal. For anybody out there who thinks that you cannot not communicate, you are always communicating. You are communicating through your body language. If you're not speaking, when you're speaking, you are communicating with your voice, okay? Verbal communication consists of all language that is spoken and written, whereas nonverbal communication is all communication that is not spoken or written. Okay? So the next thing, which is a very important component, especially for your test, is we are going to go through the components of communication. Okay? The communication process is based on 7 components. They are sender, message, environment, channel, receiver, feedback, and noise. So let's first start with sender. The sender is the originator of the message. Okay, so I am the originator of this message that I'm sending to you about Chapter 1. Then it goes into the message. The idea or feeling the sender wants to communicate is called the message. So my message to you is to review this chapter, and I want you to absorb it. Okay? It can be any idea, thought, emotion, feeling, anything that you want to communicate. The next component is the environment. Okay? The environment includes time, place, and occasion of the communication event. The time at which the communication occurs can influence the communication between people. Okay? Talking to someone in early morning or late at night can affect how we interact. The physical surroundings also play an important role. Okay? So when I do these videos, I need to make sure that my environment is quiet and peaceful, so that I can communicate to you in a very serene environment so that you get exactly what I'm telling you. Okay, the channel, which is the means by which a message is transmitted. Okay, I am transmitting this message to you through video. However, it can be channeled through hearing, sight, smell, taste, and touch. A sender can use a variety of channels to communicate her message. For instance, she wants to communicate affection to someone special. She can choose to tell the person with words, hug the person, send cookies, write a letter, or offer perfume. In public speaking, the auditory and visual channels are used more often, but it's important to keep in mind that the more channels utilized by the sender, the more impact the message has on the receiver. And I always tell my students, I always ask them, what are some main ways or main channels that we use today to communicate? And the answers that I'm looking for are email, text, things of that nature. And when you use those kind of channels, and I'm guilty of it, the feeling or emotion is missed by the receiver, okay? So the receiver is the destination of the message, okay? With the receiver, communication does not occur in public speaking. The receiver of the message is the audience. In the communication model, the receiver receives the message and then must decode the message. Decoding is the process of translating the message so that it has meaning for the receiver. A wink of the eye from the sender can be decoded or interpreted in many ways. It can be a nonverbal sign of flirting, a sign that there's dust in the eye, or even the first symptom of an epileptic seizure, okay? The decoding process is vital in communication. So many times we can decode things differently than how they're meant by the sender. Okay. And the next component is feedback, okay? The response of the receiver to the sender is called feedback. Although feedback is really a message from the receiver to the sender, the term helps us see the circular movement of the communication model. It should be stressed that the receiver can send the return message through all the same channel options as the sender when she encodes and sends the response, okay? So this sounds like a long, drawn-out process, but we do this thousands of times every day, okay? And the last component is noise, which is any disturbance or interference in the communication process. External noise is any physical interference that diminishes or reduces the meaning of the message. Examples of external noise include background talking, a jackhammer, banging outside the building, or even a distracting mannerism of the speaker. All of these or more can interfere with the communication process. Psychological or somatic interference, on the other hand, is called internal noise. Internal noise can cause us to misinterpret or decode the message in a way not intended. A word with multiple meanings is a common example of internal noise. For instance, an audience may interpret the speaker's statement. In Japan, students respect their teachers in a variety of ways, depending on the individual interpretation of the word respect. Okay? So now we're going to move on to the principles of communication, which is on page 4. Okay? Now that you have an idea of what communication is and the elements that make up the process, here are the principles of communication. You cannot not communicate. I cannot stress that enough to all of my students. When you are at the podium and maybe you are asking, doing a speech, asking somebody for, actually let me back it up. One of the topics that we will do in this semester is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, or the worst day, okay? You are not going to get up and give that speech and have smiles and things of that nature, okay? You will probably be communicating by your face even before you talk. We are always communicating. I know a perfect example is when you have a significant other and maybe they ask you what's wrong and you say, nothing, I'm fine. That really is communicating something totally different than what's coming out of your mouth, okay? Your body and movements, your use of time, the distance you stand from others, and even your clothes broadcast constant and powerful messages to observers. You are always communicating, okay? The next paragraph talks about communication is irreversible, and that cannot be more true. I, for an example, would be one of those people, I will forgive you, but I don't forget, okay? Communication, you cannot reverse something, all right? And the next part is communication is a process. You never step into the same river twice. And a good example of this is, you know, there's those quotes, there's, yesterday is gone, tomorrow may never come, but you have to live in the present day. You can never repeat a communication process, okay? Every time you do it, something is a little bit different. And another example I give to my students is, how many times have you been with your friends and you just had this amazing time, and then you try and recreate it the next time you're all together and it's just not quite the same, okay? So it's a process, and it's an ever-changing process. Okay. And as the book says, communication is a process, life is a process, okay? But there's subtle things that are different each time that you communicate it. You cannot do it over and over again. On page 5, communication is learned, okay? There are some nonverbal communication behaviors that seem to be universal, such as smiling and crying. But the majority of verbal and nonverbal communication is learned, okay? And you can see that in a baby. As they get older, they learn how to smile and interact with you as an adult because they have learned that from you. Okay, so it says in the book, U.S. culture, we value and encourage direct eye contact, especially in the public speaking arena. Yet a native, and I think everybody can attest to this, if you don't look somebody in the eye in the U.S., and you learn that at a very young age, then you're a liar or you're sneaky. However, in a Japanese culture, they would interpret the same direct eye contact as a sign of rudeness and lack of respect, especially when the speaker is addressing an individual of higher status. And so they learn that. And, you know, that goes into communication being cross-cultural as well. Okay? So the most important aspect of the principle of communication is learned is that ineffective ways of communicating can be replaced by learning new, more effective methods. People often think that because they can talk, they can communicate effectively too. And that is so not true. Okay? This is far from the truth. Ernest Hemingway once warned us not to confuse motion for action. The same holds true for talking and communicating. Communicating effectively in our interpersonal and professional lives requires study and practice. Effective communication skills can be learned, and they must be learned if we are to experience a life that is meaningful and worth living. So beyond just learning how to be a public speaker, I hope that through this course that you learn to communicate more effectively in all of your relationships. That's a huge goal of mine for all of you. Okay, at the bottom of page 5, as we already spoke about, communication needs to be cross-culturally appreciated. It says perhaps the most significant lesson we can learn is that communication is often culture-specific. I know that many of my international students will share with me things that are accepted here, but maybe not in their home countries, and vice versa. Okay? They cannot, you cannot not communicate. Communication in their lives are in a process, and once they communicate a message intentionally or unintentionally, the effect is irreversible and felt by others. So you always have to be very careful about who you are speaking to. Okay? Let's see. And again, in the chapter, in that area, it talks about, again, eye contact in Japan would be disrespectful. However, eye contact here is respectful, and the list goes on and on. Alright, on the bottom of page 6, it talks about attitude is more important than aptitude, and I can't stress that enough. If you go to give a speech and you have a terrible attitude and you are asking maybe, for example, money, do you think anybody is going to give you money? Of course not. Okay? in the book it says, it's important to mention the attitude of the communicator, for the attitude of the speaker is the most important factor in effective communication. A person's attitude is far more important than his aptitude in communicating with others. An individual can be highly trained and skilled in the communication arts, but may possess an angry or critical attitude. It is this negative attitude that is sensed below the level of spoken language, and the receiver or audience ultimately will respond to it rather than to the words. And it says effective communication seemed to possess an attitude of self-acceptance. They accept who they are without having to prove a great deal of others. And flexibility is another attitude that characterizes these individuals, for they are more likely to experiment with new behaviors, take risks, and make mistakes. The most telling attitude of effective communicators is their sense of joy, not just a temporary happiness or a practiced interpersonal warmth, but a joyfulness that seems to come from deep within. Usually these individuals have lived a while, they have managed to survive and accept some of life's tragedies, and still they have chosen to embrace the beauty and mystery of life. And then on page 7, which I think is important, in the middle, the last sentence, ultimately the heart is more important than the head, and I can't stress that enough. I definitely cannot stress that enough. Okay. On page 7, it talks about communication skills for your life. It says, before we actually begin learning about the concepts and skills of effective public speaking, let's spend a few moments examining your personal communication life, because how you communicate interpersonally lays the foundation for your attitude and skills in public speaking. Effective public speaking must be audience-centered. And we are going to talk more about this as the chapters go on. But one thing, especially if you are very nervous to do public speaking and have waited to take this course to the absolute end, I promise you that you may not still love public speaking, but you will be able to do it. And the first thing that I want you to realize, that it's not about you. Okay? It's not about you up at the podium. It's not about you anymore. It's about your audience and the message that you want to send to them. Okay? Okay. All right. On page 8, down at the bottom, it says you either enlarge or diminish another person by your interactions with every word, sound, gesture, expression, glance, movement, pause, and touch you share with another person. He or she is changed in ways that are both subtle and striking. And it says there are 6 specific ways you can enlarge others by your interpersonal communication with them. Not taking communication so personally, listening without verbal interruption, which is a huge one, listening reflectively, complimenting others, and reframing and touching. Okay? So the first one on page 8 is not taking communication so personally. I know that I am very guilty of this. That's just the kind of person I am, but I try to be better about it, okay? It says we need to develop the ability to suspend judgment when listening to another person. I know, sometimes it's very hard, but the book gives you ways to do that. When we always take what is said personally, we get hooked into many unnecessary arguments, conflicts, and struggles. An effective technique that can help you disengage your ego and not take everything that is said so personally is to ask these questions when you're listening to someone else. What is this person's point of view? What does this say about this person? How is this person feeling? Where is this person coming from? How does this person see the situation? And who is this person? Again, take yourself out of it and ask these questions and put yourself into this person's shoes, okay? We're not taking communication so personally. The ability to not take communication personally is the first step in communication, and I couldn't agree more, okay? The next one on page 9, it talks about listening without verbal interruption. This, especially in our society, is impossible, okay? It is so hard for us. But I will tell you a personal experience. I have been teaching for 4 years now. And after reading this book semester after semester, I have practiced this. And I've actually become like the listening police. And I can sit in a conversation and say, wow, this person is not a good listener, okay? And we will have a chapter, I believe it's chapter 6, that is completely about listening. Okay. Now that we can accept what is being said from an other-centered point of view, we can begin to listen without verbal interruption. The ability to be silent for a period of time when someone else is speaking. Okay? Did you know that when we are talking with another person, we verbally interrupt the other person every 12 seconds? Every 12 seconds! And even though we're just trying to encourage them, in our society we are afraid of silence, and so this is why we do that, okay? One of the most enlarging behaviors we can share with another person is to listen without verbal evaluation, without interrupting every 12 seconds. What an oasis that would be. Perhaps the most loving thing we can do for another human being is to listen quietly, deeply, without interruptions. And I am telling you, if you can practice this, we will do an exercise on this, but I truly, truly believe in this. When you sit and you look at somebody and you just listen to them. It has worked wonders with my children, with my spouse, with my friends. It's definitely a proven thing, okay? You may get a question, is everything okay? Like, because you're not responding. And the way that you can say that is, everything is fine. I just think what you're saying is important and I didn't want to interrupt you. Okay. The next thing is listening reflectively. In addition to not taking communication too personally and listening without verbal interruptions, another enlarging communication behavior is to listen reflectively. To listen reflectively means to mirror back to the speaker what he is saying. You definitely want to know this because it is on the test, okay? As you begin to get a chance to get a sense of exactly what this person is attempting to communicate to you, reflect or mirror back to the speaker. The simplest way to accomplish this is to begin your question with, are you saying? I hear you saying. You think? You believe? Are you feeling? Your point is? Do you mean? Okay, that is listening reflectively. Okay? These are simple beginnings to your questions, but they will change your entire focus of your communication. Once again, where is the attention directed? You or the other person? Right, the other person. Again, it's not about you. Okay? That talks about the advantages of that. On page 11, it talks about complimenting others. Let's face it, we all love a good compliment, okay? The first step in developing this skill is to decide to be a source of compliments. Begin to look for the best in others, okay? Sure, all individuals have their weaknesses, faults, and areas for improvements, but shift your focus of attention and instead see their strengths of character, achievement, and effort. And I will tell you, it will change your life. Okay? And then it just goes the different ways that you can compliment somebody. Then on page 12, it talks about reframing what is said. Okay? So make sure you know the difference between reflective listening and reframing what is said. Okay? Fifth way you can enlarge a person is to reframe his negative perception of a situation, circumstance, or person. The reframing technique involves seeing something from a different perspective or point of view. Okay? This is important again. Okay? Almost like devil's advocate, but you don't need to look for the bad part of it. Okay? And on 13 it says, it gives a story and it says, as a counselor, I don't change my client's situation. I simply help them see other ways of viewing the same situation. This seems to have a freeing effect on clients. And it does. It really, really does. As a friend, you can enlarge others by opening their eyes to other ways of viewing a situation. John, another way of looking at this is, Mary, this could also mean. Dad, another interpretation of this is, okay? So make sure you know the difference between those two, but they will both really help you. And then on 13, it talks about touching others. You know, if you touch them on the shoulder or their hand, or it just, you as a speaker, and once you get more comfortable, if you're walking around the audience, it just brings that personal contact to your speech instead of just sitting at a podium like, okay, this is my speech today. All right? So that is chapter 1 on communication. Areas where you really want to focus for the chapter 1 exam. Your test will be chapters 1 through 5, but I've created these videos so that you can go back to them. You want to know the components of communication. What is communication? The principles of communication. You want to know about attitude. Communication skills for your life. Again, the principles of communication, and pretty much that's it. Okay.